So we're back here now, paper P5 lecture number 3. For those of you who are just starting now, I do strongly recommend that you watch lectures 1 and 2 if you can sit through a whole 2 hours of me. But this lecture number 3, which actually I think is called number 2 because it's topic number 2, talking about the business structure. Before we go on and get into this, I just want to come back to this thing. I told you in the last lectures that I'm going to bore you to death by using the phrase structure, structure, structure. It's still what it's all about. I was going through the exam results the other day. Paper P5 had the lowest pass rate of all of the 14 papers. There was only 29% of people who got through. When you speak to people who haven't passed the exam, the one message that's coming through is that people don't know why they haven't passed. And I can tell you now that having marking, certainly mock exams, I've never been a marker for P5 officially, but marking mock exams for various training companies, the reason that people don't get through is because they don't get this idea of structure. So once again, you must get into your head this can opener of going in, reading the question, if at all possible, picking a model, and we talked before about Michael Porter and we talked about SWOT and so on. Pick your model, that gives you your structure. 1 mark for lifting something from the question there is a problem with, and then 1 or 2 marks for the discussion and saying how you would make it better and how you would deal with the issues that are arising in the question. That's your approach. There is very little technical knowledge that you need for all of this stuff. It's all about approach, all about getting a structure to your answer, all about interpreting the question and getting stuff down on paper, which is what the marker wants to hear. Get your 50% and move on. Right, so we're going to go on and look now at some more little models here. The first one that we're going to look at is Michael Porter's value chain, and Michael Porter's value chain was actually in the June exam this year being 2015, for those of you watching it in later years. Okay, so this is Porter's value chain. Porter's value chain was designed many years ago now to look at how a business actually works. Right, there's an underlying principle to this. The underlying principle to this is that there are costs attached to each of these stages. So, and therefore, your organization will make a margin or a profit if its customers are willing to pay more than the combined total of those costs. Okay, so that's your starting point. Now, your primary activities, and if you look at this picture, and those of you who sat the exam in June 2015, they actually gave you the picture. Therefore, Porter identifies that there are 5 main activities that we undertake, and these are these coloured boxes at the bottom. Now, pinned someone's photographing. So, inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics, marketing, sales, and service. So we've got these 5 different boxes here. So inbound logistics is the process of bringing things to you. Operations is what you actually do with them. Outbound logistics, sending your products out. Marketing and sales, the process of selling them. And service, therefore, is this idea of providing a service of those goods once they've gone. Those are your 5 primary activities. Again, as with everything in paper P5, I don't think that there's anything that's particularly difficult to do there. In terms of structure, making it apply to an exam, what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to take a manufacturing industry. So let's assume that you have an industry that does something which is, the manufacturing of cars. Right, if it's the manufacturing of cars, therefore, you're not expected to have a detailed knowledge. So within the manufacturing of cars, therefore, what do you bring in? You bring in your components. So your components will be presumably completed engines already. You've got your tyres, you've got your plastic that goes inside your seats and so on. Operations is the work of the conveyor, which is going to put the whole thing together. And outbound logistics then is the distribution of those motor cars. As motor cars are built large volume items, and so your factory will be serving probably several countries, not just the country that you're in, then you have the various levels of distribution. Marketing and sales, so what level of marketing and sales do we do? And then after sales service, if that's relevant. With motor cars, it'll be more to do with warranties and guarantees. And conceivably, if you are manufacturing them yourself, the provision of spare parts to service authorities. Right, those are your primary activities. Again, it seems looking at the structure of the exam, the maximum that you're going to get is 15 marks for something on this. If you're going to get 15 marks, therefore you're going to be looking at 5 different levels. They're 3 marks each. From the question, we identify something under inbound logistics. So what's happening with inbound logistics? Give you an example. Nissan in Sunderland at one stage got very, very tied up with their inbound logistics because Sunderland Football Club were building the Stadium of Light. Now, they had a just-in-time stocking system, and that meant with their just-in-time stocking system, when the lorries couldn't get through to stock the warehouse, that the whole production process ceased. In car manufacture, the most expensive thing of all is ceasing the production process, so stopping the conveyor. And they work very much around activity-based costing and activity-based management to ensure that conveyor does not stop. So those would be the kind of things you would look at in a car manufacturing. Operations now, more and more is done by robots. I think Fiat in Italy had the first ever 100% robot-operated plant. If you go to plants in places like North America, when you look at Ford in Detroit, so I think it's called the Henry Ford is the place at Dearborn, you'll see there's lots and lots of people running around. More modern plants that you see in places like Toyota have very, very few people. Outbound logistics for your motor cars. With your outbound logistics, again, you're looking at where it is that you're actually sending them to. Marketing and sales for motor cars is fairly obvious. They use the usual channels, television obviously, and they're trying to generate demand, product placements as well, so on, films and so on. And finally, aftercare service, which is more of a financial thing. Most motor car companies outsource aftercare service of their motor cars to third-party organisations, and then they refund them. So here you're just looking at negotiating those items. Right, that is Michael Porter's value chain. Now, Porter recognises those 5 main items on that value chain, and then what he says then is that you have to look at how they interact. So we have inbound logistics, the components come into the factory. How do the components then go into the warehousing system, and then from the warehousing system onto the conveyor? I think most motor car companies have that fairly well trained down now, and if you have computer-driven, robot-driven systems, then they are very ergonomically designed to fit those systems. Outbound logistics, again, then what happens with your outbound logistics? My expectation, I don't know, but my expectation is that they work closely with outbound logistics firms, and that there's a very, very close supplier relationship there. In the way that just-in-time stocking tends to lead you to narrow your number of suppliers, so you have a high-volume, high-quality type supplier relationship, I would imagine that for the motor car industry, outbound logistics works the same. The trick is ensuring that your motor cars go to the right places, so which dealers need which models and even which colours. And if you're doing something like Toyota, your manufacturing plant is in Derby, so which side of the car does the wheel go on as well, that kind of thing. So all stuff that I'm sure in practice they can do in 30 seconds. And then the service provision, how do you ensure the quality of the service in terms of the product itself, the service product, and also the behaviour of that service dealer. Right, those are your primary activities. In addition to that, Porter talks about 4 other things which are support activities, so are considered to be sort of second division and less important. And they are procurement. Having spent a lot of time working in accounting and IT systems for procurement, I'm not so sure that I would agree that they are such a minor item. But procurement, so how do we actually purchase our goods? Technology development. The importance of technology development will depend on the organization itself. Somebody like Apple, I think, would argue that technology development is incredibly important. Again, if you're looking at making a standard Camel cigarettes, which I think first went on sale in 1928 or something, there's not really so much happening there. Human resource management will again depend on the importance of people to your business. If you are PricewaterhouseCoopers, it will be considerably more important than if you are a virtual Mars making chocolate bars where there's virtually no people there. Having said that, you still have accountants, you still have Salesforce. So human resource, very, very important. And finally, the firm's infrastructure, so how the reporting lines are set up, how the firm is organized, and then we go on to McKinsey and the different types of culture and so on. Okay. Right, that is Michael Porter's value chain. I think I've got a couple more slides on this, so let's move on and talk a little bit more. But I'll give you a little break for a second. Okay, so basically we've covered everything that's in this slide while I was sort of rabbiting on in slide number 2 there. So inbound logistics. Once again, the one thing that, forgive me for being a bit cheeky, but I like very much, is that try to think of everything in a scenario. So I gave you car manufacturing. I gave you car manufacturing because I worked many years ago on a consulting project for Nissan in Sunderland. But try to think all the time of a scenario, because remember what we're doing. We're talking structure. So therefore, think of a scenario and then think how you're going to apply it. You've looked at the questions now. You've seen the number of marks per question. The guy's going to give you, if it's question 1, a 50-mark question. Then he's going to break that down into various parts. So you're going to be looking at this at 10 or 15 marks. Let's assume it's 15 marks. So you've got 5 things to write about. Now think structure. Going through my mind, I've got 15 marks. I've got Michael Porter. Michael Porter's given me these 5 things. Okay, we've got this idea of a model, but now let's take the model and just say, right, inbound logistics is this practical process of bringing things to us in our factory. Now let's reach into the question and say, within the question, this ABC company has this issue. And that's what I want you to think all the time with these models. In terms of levels of technical difficulty, there's nothing to learn here. You know this already. What you have to do is be able to take this thing and apply it. That's the skill you're being tested on. And that is the difference between passing this exam and failing it. And that's why 71% of the people failed. Because when they studied, they opened the question and they went straight to, I know that. And they did. Everybody knows it. I'm sorry, but there's no skill in that. What's being skilled is taking the model, applying it to the question, giving structure. Just notice there that I've changed it, the very last line, to make it quite clear what this thing is. So your grey box, I think it's a little grey colour. I'm getting colourblind in my old age. It says after sales. So that final part is what happens after the sale. Okay, and this is just more of the same, and you can see I've used the same smart art here. I hope that you're all clear on what it means, firm infrastructure. It means the structure of the firm, not that the structure should be firm. So it's the infrastructure, God, that's a hard word to say, infrastructure of the company itself. Maybe I should change that to company. But that's what it means. And that means, therefore, is the company this kind of flat level where people get to make lots of decisions, or is it a very heavy sort of United Nations style bureaucracy, and so on and so forth. So how is the firm actually set up? Is it very centralized, or is it decentralized, and so on? So that's this idea of the firm's infrastructure. It's not completely clear how that, from Michael Porter's theory, adds a cost. But if it's a bureaucracy, then the additional work that's required, administrative work, will add a cost. Technology development, I think, is fairly straightforward. I've written here human resource development, but it really means human resources. What's the role of human resources in all of this? And what's the cost of human resources? And finally, procurement. Personally, I don't think in the 21st century that human resources and procurement should be relegated to minor parts of the firm, but back in the day when this was being developed. Right, so those are the 4 things there. In terms of the exam question, the guy actually gave you the picture, so therefore you don't even have to learn this stuff. And it was in the June 2015 exam. So you should just know what all of these things are. The overriding idea is that all of these things bring costs, so it's almost like a pseudo cost system. I think nowadays, 21st century as well, you're going to have to look at the question and see whether any of these things that Porter thinks are not so relevant become relevant. I already mentioned technology development with Apple, Samsung, anything in that kind of field is going to be the same. Human resource development, I think many forward-thinking organizations would look at developing their people as a major cost and an important cost. And procurement as well. Now, I do lots of training on anti-fraud through procurement systems, and so things now, open auctions and so on, all designed to make processes transparent and to force down purchasing costs. So I don't see procurement as this sort of small part overhead. Right, that's Porter's value chain. A further explanation, these things here which are on slide 2, he considers to be the less important ones. So the slide here says that what are the advantages of the value chain, but I think you need to think about this as some form of a process as well. So what we're doing, therefore, is that we divide up the processes of an organisation into those 5 headings. So the 5 headings: inbound logistics, outbound logistics, operations. And then it says that we then focus on each activity. So within each activity, we look at what we're doing, and we look at the costs which are arising. And the point of this thing is to say which costs add value and which costs don't. And if you look at your textbook, you'll see that they give you some examples there of various companies that identify blockages and then work on freeing up those blockages. The value chain itself, therefore, looks at these 5 areas. Notice here that it says it highlights the link between activities. So as you're going from warehouse into operations, it will look at that link and that movement. So if you're talking about motor cars, we're looking at the movement of components and raw materials and so on from one to another. I want to say that that's very important, because the way that most companies will be structured is that there will be a warehouse function with a head of warehouse. There will be an operations with a head of production, probably several in car manufacturing. And that bit between, how do you get the components from the warehouse to the conveyor, is probably something that doesn't fall under any particular individual's remit. So therefore, it'll often highlight areas where there's just simply a lack of control and a lack of what's the word I'm looking for? Responsibility. I was going to say authorization. Responsibility. So the value chain, therefore, emphasizes the critical success factors, examines primary and support functions as well. So we have this idea that you have your 5 main functions and then these lesser ones. So those ones there are the advantages. That's certainly the way that the value chain was written, to look in that way at those things. And in that way, it's quite useful, I guess. So this slide where we're now up to, which is number 6, we've gone through this fairly quickly, looks at the disadvantages of the value chain, and I think I must have lifted these straight from the textbook. More suited to manufacturing than service, which is certainly true. The reason there is because in manufacturing, usually you're producing large numbers of similar items, whereas if you're doing audits, is one value chain system analysis going to be valid for every single audit? Secondly, it says it can be time-consuming and expensive. Just to add my personal experience to this, I've actually worked as the head of a team in the United Nations agency, going through their procedures, throughout their admin finance procedures, and looking to cut out unnecessary operations. The problem with the value chain is that it's too rigid. When you look at this, if you're looking at the United Nations, for example, inbound logistics, well, they don't really have inbound logistics. Operations, the operations are varied, and very varied, from disaster relief through to how to place an invoice or buying a new computer in head office in New York. So very, very different. Again, outbound logistics, well, the UN doesn't have any outbound logistics. And the problem the problem as someone who works in both practice and in theory, is that Michael Porter's value chain is way too prescriptive. You need to take the diagram, then take out all of the box headings. So you could start back with slide number 2 with that as a diagram, but just delete all of the things that are in the boxes, and then for your own organisation, put them in. The other thing is that with a major manufacturing organisation, when you look at the value chain, what goes into operations is going to be 20 times bigger than what goes into outbound logistics or what goes into service, for example. So it seems to me that Michael Porter's value chain is a very, very useful starting point in real life, but that's what it is as a starting point, and then you need to adapt it and build your own model that's relevant for your business. That in real life will give you political issues, of saying this department's more important than that department, blah, 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 this needs more attention and more work than this department, and you're going to get the people issues. As far as the exam goes, I like it very much as a topic, because I think it's nice and easy for you to learn. Structure, structure, structure. You have a situation, they have some issues, you have the value chain, we have nice little boxes so you can write, gives you nice little headings in your report, and for the examiner and for students, I think Michael Porter's value chain is a great little topic. Okay, you should turn me off now, and you should spend 30 seconds just thinking of a scenario. Car manufacturer is the one that came to me while I was sitting here in this hotel room. How do we use Michael Porter's value chain in an exam scenario? You'll be given the scenario, you've got your boxes, you've got your 5 headings, identify the point, and then a comment and a conclusion, and away you go. Stick to the topic. If you're writing under the heading of inbound logistics, don't start to talk about demographics. Mean old people are getting older, so they don't want sports cars anymore. No one gives a crap. Stick on topic, to the point. Use bullet points wherever you can. So in the first 5 or 6 slides, therefore, we looked at this concept of Michael Porter and the value chain. And Michael Porter said that a organization, let's assume it's a company, that the company, I don't want to use the word valued, but what's happening within the company, or we can look at the company and say that we have these 5 different processes, so inbound logistics, outbound logistics, and so on. And then what will happen is that the company will be profitable if the cost or the value which is built up at each of those 5 processes, plus this idea of the support services. So if the value that customers perceive that they get from the product is greater than the combined cost of those 5 different departments plus the support services. Now we're going to move on to a slightly different view of an organization, and this comes from McKinsey. Now McKinsey's one of the world's largest consulting firms, hugely expensive consulting firm. I've actually done this in real life, worked on one of these for a bizarre organization, which is a police force in a large city in Russia. So the McKinsey 7 S's are the ways in which we analyze how an organization is set up, and it's the way that an organization is set up based on basically its people. Much more useful in terms of organizations which are people based. So if you were looking at our PricewaterhouseCoopers profitable, of course they're hugely profitable, but then you would be more inclined to look at McKinsey than you would at Michael Porter, because it's much more to do with people. Other organizations, as I said, I looked at this in terms of a police force. So a police force which is beginning to recognize that it needs to improve its reputation. It needs to improve to get that level of reputation. It needs to improve its quality of service. So there is, on some level and in certain parts of the organization, a recognition that they cannot continue the way that they are. They need to get some trust from the general populace. So that would be, let's assume therefore that we're looking at a police force in a country. To give you an example of where this has worked with police forces, if you look at Georgia, the country of Georgia, which is in the Caucasus south of Russia, they had a huge anti-corruption program, and the police literally the traffic police came to work in the morning one day and found that every single one of them, from general down to the lowest cleaner, had been fired in an attempt to stop corruption, and they then rehired back police. And they did that, and it cut out within the traffic police a huge amount of corruption, and something that the people of Georgia can be and are very, very proud of. So that's an idea, is that we get this we're looking at an organization and we're saying, how does it function as it is? And usually it's within the setting of how do we change it. McKinsey's identified 7 things, which why there are 7 S's, and 3 of those you'll see it says, in fact, twice it says it are hard S's. So hard S's are hard S's because they are generally easy to quantify. So when I say quantify in this sense, it's going to be describe more. So those 3 ones are strategy. I think you all know what strategy means. So what is the strategy of the organization? You would hope normally that the strategy would be written down and would be followed, and you know from your studies that then you have the mission statement, the strategy, the tactics, the goals, and so on. So what is the strategy of the organization? So within a police force, what are we actually trying to do? We're trying to solve crimes, and we're trying to prevent crimes. Now there's also here, where I was working, this sub-strategy that we're also beginning to try and look at the idea of gaining the trust of the population. Because most of the population feel that if they've been a victim of a crime, the only thing that could make that worse would be that the police would arrive. Certainly there's lots of stories about the police arriving at burglaries and the house being burgled a second time and so on. So this idea of strategy, what are we really trying to do? The structure of the organization, so how is the organization set up? What's usually, you have your triangle, so in a police force you'll have a general, then below him you have 3 captains and then 10 lieutenants and blah 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 blah. The whole thing goes on down until the bottom line when you have the basic constables on the beat, traffic police out there stopping cars, collecting fines, and so on. So what's the structure of the organisation and how does it work? Now, again, those two things should be fairly easy to quantify because the strategy should be written down, and though it may not be in developing countries, and certainly African countries, wherever they won't have a process of even writing down a strategy, but the structure, therefore, should be written down. And again, the structure in sort of post-Soviet countries will still be fairly rigid if you're looking at the police. And finally, the systems. So what actually are the procedures? If you're dealing with the police, you have this legal concept, therefore, that there are legal procedures which are rather obviously written down in the law. So which legal procedures do we have to follow? And, you can't have a conviction if there's no evidence, blah, blah, in principle. Right, those things are called your hard essays. Please notice that you should try to remember as much of this as you can, but your current examiner seems to be helping you out big time in that he will give you this in the exam. So once again, our scenario planning to give us our structure is that you'll be given some comments on a police force. Now, police forces have been in the exam at paper P5, so you'll be told that there are police forces, that they have a set strategy, they have a set structure, and you are going to make some comments on this organisation based on those things. So with your strategy, they are trying to solve crimes. Maybe they should be looking at preventing crimes. Maybe they should be building trust. Maybe they should be building information systems to share information, whatever. But you should be able to have a heading, which is strategy. Then under strategy, you lift your point from the question, and then you take your point and you develop it, and you're looking at writing one or two sentences. As far as the hard essays, which are things which should be relatively easy to define in real life, because your strategy, your structure, and your system should be written down. Strategy should be written down as the written strategy. Structure, you'll have an org chart, and with your systems, you should be able to look at the procedures manual. Those are your hard essays. Now, McKinsey's also said there are 4 soft essays, and those are the ones below. So these are your shared values. So once again, when you do this in real life, they give you a list of things to fill in. So who are the heroes? Who are the people who are rewarded? Who are the people who you look up to? Who are the people who really have power, as opposed to the people on the org chart who ought to have power? So what are your shared values? And particularly, what are the things that people in that organization get credit for? So, cracking a few heads in the police force, or is it really taking a long time and getting convictions? Or in some police forces, in some countries, is it really just about running a business and bringing in money, which is a sad thing to say, but where levels of corruption are very high, that's true as well. So what are your shared values? Style, what is the management style? Most police forces in development countries, the management style is fairly autocratic, so it's run almost like the army. So the captain will shout at the lieutenant, and the lieutenant has to stand to attention, and there's very little question of being a self-starter, of questioning what's coming from above, of doing your own thing and following your nose. I haven't worked in the British police, but I imagine that the British police, I would hope, are more based around free thinking. It's more of an audit process where this is what this piece of evidence has taken us to this point, so where do we go to the next one? Shared values, who are your heroes, what makes you popular in the organization, what makes you successful, and style, what's the management style? Right, staff. When you're looking at staff, therefore, staff and skills kind of go together. So staff is what staff do you require, and skills is what skills do those people require. So staff, I guess, to some degree is numbers, and therefore skills is within those numbers, what do they have? So they have to have some form of intuition, I guess, to be a good detective. They have to have some form of being able to assess quality of information. That would be an important one. I worked for a company in Moscow, and we got some guys to come along from the FSB and talk about assessing the quality of information. You hear a rumor, a bomb is going to go off. How do you assess whether that's a realistic threat or not a realistic threat? So skills and staff. Again, there will be something in the question about they do not have writing skills, or Moscow police put in a new computer system, and the new computer system did not have Russian Cyrillic letters. So they are writing Cyrillic words using English letters. So skills, and I guess within skills, therefore, what typing skills do you have? Right, let's go back. Let's be really boring. Let's go structure, structure, structure. What are we talking about? In your exam, you've got 7 headings. So we've got 7 headings, so we take strategy. The strategy organization is to solve crimes. Maybe it would be just as good if they worked on prevention of crimes. Then we could work on prevention of crimes by improving information sources, building trust with the public authorities, installing cameras, and there you go. You've taken your point from the question, which is your starting point, you've drawn a conclusion, you've made a comment, and you've suggested a solution. Move on. Systems. Some of the systems are overly bureaucratic. It takes 4 people to sign a piece of paper to authorize to buy petrol for the car. Reduce that to a budget and 1 person or 2 people, 1 person to authorize petrol for the car, and then 1 person in the finance department monitors petrol costs. Right, you've taken something from the question, you've said what it is, and then you've recommended the change. Right, those are McKinsey's 7 S's. I recommend that you do your best to learn them. I suspect unless you put a lot of effort in, you won't really be able to learn all 7. I hope that I certainly can't guarantee that the examiner would give you that picture anyway, if it was the exam, but work again on this idea of structure. Okay, that's McKinsey's 7 S's. Okay, so our next topic in here, and the little paper 5 thing following on from McKinsey now, is called business process re-engineering. Business process re-engineering is a very, very fancy term, and the fancy term simply means is that you work back through your processes, and as you go through your processes, you see how improvements can be made. Improvements simply meaning that the work can be done faster, the work can be done more logically, there is less wastage, and so on and so forth. So you start with the process of flow charting what happens in your process, and usually, certainly where I've seen this, has been in bureaucracies like the United Nations. To hire a full-time member of staff in the United Nations takes 6 months. That's not very much use if you need people on the ground who are going out there because an earthquake has happened. So therefore, the point is let's have a look at the process and see what we can do to improve it. What tends to happen through processes is that over time they become sort of reactionary. So you will end up with, we need to get this document signed which approves an advertisement, and that takes 3 different signatures, and then when it comes back it has to be approved by another 3 different people, and this is the kind of process that you get building up. Auditors are concerned about something, so you insert the process, and what we see is this idea that you get with the United Nations. Other things, of course, that happen is that technology moves on. So, for example, procurement. Now, what can happen is that you have a procurement system. The procurement system creates an order, and when I say an order, it creates just if you want to call it an inbox, and then so the copy of the requisition goes to the inbox. When the copy of the requisition goes to the inbox, then copies of all of the approvals go into the inbox. And by going through the inbox, we can see that everything has been collected, all the boxes have been ticked, and we don't get documents flying all over the place. Also, if you send it to your manager, it needs an approval, you can tick a box, and that will require the guy to reply. If he hasn't replied within a week, then he's going to get reminders. And by this automation of administrative functions, I am totally sure that the same thing happens in production as well. We have this idea that we sort of start with, to some degree, a blank piece of paper. We look at all of the controls that are in place, and we decide how we can cut those things down. It is particularly common and popular where I've seen it in HR, because in HR you have so many checks and balances about transparency and process, and they can just simply get too much. When you work for large bureaucracies like the United Nations as well, they have this mentality that this is not our money, this is the money of our donors, and so we must never waste any of this money, none must be allowed to be stolen or to be lost or whatever. And the problem with that is that throughout the system, therefore, a mentality builds up that more checks is better. The unfortunate fact is that more checks means more people, and you actually end up wasting money. Okay, that's business process re-engineering. It's a very simple idea. There is, and therefore, when you look at the slide, it tells you here, jobs are combined, workers are empowered. Jobs are combined. There's been many instances as well where one person's job is to collect a set of documents, and they give it to the second person, and the second person then reviews it. And often what happens is that it can take months or whatever to go from person A to person B. the number of documents that are required, the amount of time can be reduced. And I know that my wife worked on one of these for British American Tobacco, and they managed to cut 10 days out of the whole invoicing process. If you're collecting your money 10 days faster and you're in $1 billion business, that's a lot of money you've just saved. So jobs are combined, workers are empowered. Usually the idea is to give people, certainly at the start, a voice so that they think that, well, this requires less, this requires more, this is a waste of time. And it says that workers perform more logically. The problem with this on a human basis is that people will begin to justify the need for their jobs, and so we need to show that therefore there aren't going to be mass redundancies as a part of this. Reconciliations are reduced. Again, reconciliations you see so often you can do through Excel spreadsheets or whatever now, and a point of contact is created. That's often very, very true, so that someone takes responsibility for a process. Okay. It's a very, very fancy term, something obviously that the big consultancy firms love to make huge sums of money over. It's very, very simple process in real life. And it's something as well that many organisations now actually have little groups of people who have specialisms in procurement, specialisms in, where I was in the UN, we set up a little group, 4 or 5 people, and they just went around process after process through the manual, seeing where they could save money, and the money savings, the justification for their existence. So have a look at the question then. If you go onto the website, you'll see that the question is attached there, and there's actually an answer as well. The first part of the question, and the question that we've got here is just called Business Process Re-engineering. And it's for 5 marks, and it says, briefly explain process re-engineering. Right, now what's happening is that you're hitting the actual exam questions. This is a question, I've got a feeling that this is actually an old CIMA question rather than an ACCA question, but it's still pretty relevant, and this is a fairly sort of terse and short question here. So part A asks you to explain what business process re-engineering is. Now remember, this is paper P5. We talked at the start about structure. So before you start writing, you should make a plan. You will have time in this exam to make a plan as well. So I'm just going to give you the plan outline. The official examiner's answer is attached as well. What we're doing therefore with this business process re-engineering, what is it? Well, I've just copied forward from the slide before. A fundamental rethink and radical redesign of business processes. You can use that if you want. Right, what happens with business process re-engineering? We examine our current process. So you start from, we're at point A. What is there at point A? So it says here, I've written start with a flow chart of procedures. For the flowchart of procedures, you'll take a sort of an audit approach. So what do the people actually do? What are the controls in place? Remember, the process may be manufacturing and it may not be. It may be something like hiring of people. What are the controls in place? What are the procedures? How long does each one take? What deadline do people have? What are the functions that people perform? And then you rework that process and you try to work out how we can cut out some of these procedures and so on. The object is not simply to hack them out. The object is to take out what does not add any value. So if 3 people have to approve something, why not reduce that to 2? You would normally always want to have 2 people. Or if you have 1 person approves at stage A, why can't a second person, but someone different, approve at stage B? And if they have sight of all of the documents, you're still getting this concept of segregation of duties. With manufacturing, it may be simpler. We see that, well, this conveyor belt is over there, and this conveyor belt is over there, and someone has to carry the stuff between. Well, why not move the conveyor belt so that they touch each other, or install another conveyor belt? Obviously, good communication, so talking to your workers and getting their ideas is a good idea, and you mustn't do that in such a way that they think they're going to get their jobs. Right, that was pretty much an example of how to ramble on. So now let's have a look at how you structure that into an actual answer to make sure that you're writing for something like 8 minutes and you're getting the 5 points. Fundamental rethink of how the thing works. We start with a flowcharts of procedures, identify the necessary steps, and we eliminate the steps which add no value. This may be jobs combined and the workers perform more logically, and we'll get the answer that we require from the people themselves. They need to feel a positive part of that process. There you go, and that's your 5 marks, and that's what you're looking for in the exam. In general, with these things, what we're looking for is 1 point for identification and 1 point for expansion. If you just go, oh, there's a problem here, which is the identification, Okay, fine, but you need to take that on. That will not be enough to pass the exam. Okay, I hope that's clear. Send me any questions if you didn't like that. So part B of the question then asks you to explain the contribution the management accountant should make to the planning and implementation of business process re-engineering. So you've already explained what it is. So what's the management accountant actually going to do? Well, the first thing is that the management accountant presumably will be responsible for money. So the first thing I would say is that we would work with, from the financial side, looking at money. Now remember as well that the way the division of the organisation may work financially may be different from it in a production line. The production manager will see a conveyor belt, and that will be his core tool, and then we get materials and we get labour and we get overhead coming in, whereas the management accountant may take that step back and say, well, we have three different things here. We have labour, we have materials, and we have overhead. So therefore, what I've put down in the first thing here is that my first point, and remember, as I'm trying to design a plan for you, he will work with the operations managers to divide up the processes. So he will have a different perspective on how that production process works, because he's looking at as to where does the money come in, where does the money go out, if that's better, whereas they are looking more in how do we actually construct the goods that we are building. Please remember that I'm going to come up with 5 things here. First of all, why is it 5? Well, it's 10 marks. Remember what we said, 1 mark for identification and then 1 mark for expansion. If you're looking at this going, but I've got all these other different points, your points are just as good as mine, but you must go through the same process. Write down the 5 things that you've come up with. When you've got those 5 things, then you have to then work out how you're going to expand them. So first of all, we work with the operation manager to divide up the process. We divide up because we will be able to look at this and say, well, this is the cash flows as opposed to the actual flows of time and labour and so on. That will give a different perspective. So while they say, oh, we can't do this any faster, or it won't give any better, so that the production manager may say we can't do this any faster, or it may not give us any better quality, you can say, but if you did this, it would save us money. So you're giving this financial perspective that the production manager may not have. And we're just looking at production. There may be HR as well. Well, maybe we could replace some people who are earning £25,000–30,000 a year with a machine which costs £25,000–30,000. It goes into positive payback after a year. So this idea, that's what that phrase, the first phrase means. Again, I come back to it. This is what I've chosen. If you don't like it, choose something else. Number 2 is show the link between the production and the IT system. Usually the production manager will be focused, as you can imagine, on production. What will happen with the IT system is that the information technology system may, again, have a different perspective. This is where these things are coming onto the production line. This is where this person performs this task, which is necessary for production. How does that actually work with the information technology system? So how does the information technology system actually gather information and then produce back summaries of that information in a report format? Usually, my experience is that the finance department, or something related to the finance department, will also have a better use of the IT technology. And IT tends to, in my experience, not necessarily, but tends to work on that side. So the management accounting can work together with the production teams. Again, the HR, forgive me, but my experience with people in HR is they tend not to be that great with IT. And they can provide that link between the IT system, explaining how we can change the IT system, and maybe we can change the forms of our reports, maybe put some financial numbers in so that the numbers are clear, so that our KPIs change slightly, or that certainly our dashboards are changed, so that the production managers, the HR managers, even the warehouse managers become more linked into the financial side of the practice of the business. Number 3 is simply financial information, and in this sense, we all the way through it's going to be financial information. So that sounds like a bit of a dead point. The financial information we're talking about here is how we can present the financial information externally. So what do we need to do for the shareholders? What do we need to do for the directors? What information do they need that relates to costs? So the management accountant, I think obviously we all know will be based around financial information. But how does that actually work? Number 4 shows alternative costing approaches. So, just to go back to your studies here, I think that's fairly obvious for you if you're doing ACCA or CIMA. To show alternative costing approaches, so what's the difference between ABC and what's the difference between that and traditional full absorption costing? You'll get very different costs to your products, and that can be an interesting one, because then if you've got product managers, you may find that different product managers want different costing systems that make them look better. But that there are alternatives to costing, and obviously we should choose the one which is the most accurate. How many points is that? That's 4 already. Let's put the last one together then. Work on presentation and provide balance between departments. Certainly with the presentation of the report, what will happen is that the production staff want to say how great production is, HR want to say how brilliant the people are and how well trained they are. And you can therefore have an input on the presentation. And this idea of balance as well. Often, as happens so often in life, the warehousing department will not like the production department, because the production department will never give them the right information, and then the guys out there who do the finished goods, if they're motor cars or something, will never like production either. Production won't like them because they don't get what's coming off the line in the right colours, and marketing are selling things that don't exist. But you always get these small conflicts between departments, and these conflicts will spill over into everything. The management accountant, if he can sell himself as a nice, calm, impartial intermediary, will also have some value in that he can often be the deciding factor in decisions. There's a big role. I mean, that's the 5 different things you've got there. I've just linked the last 2 to give 5. Go back to it. You must make a plan. Planning, working out what you're gonna list. This part of the question gives you an absolutely perfect opportunity to just write, but crap at random. Plan, blah blah blah. Get everything set down. 1 point for identification and 1 point for expansion. Okay. Right, so part C of the question, which was another 10 marks, said what are the advantages and disadvantages. So this slide's the advantage and the next one is the disadvantages. Right, I mean, I think this is really very easy. It can speed up the manufacturing cycle, and we thought manufacturing, it's not just manufacturing, it can also speed up the admin processes. We've certainly seen staff hiring in places like UNICEF. They've cut from 3 months down to 1 month by just cutting down periods of time that advertisements had to be advertised by, use of rosters, and cutting the number of authorizations from 4 to 2 sort of thing. And there hasn't been, to the best of my knowledge, any great problems with that, or any problems with fraud or any kind of machinations like that. So it can speed up the manufacturing or the admin cycle. It can eliminate unnecessary procedures. That certainly happens as well. Again, getting adverts that have a month to be approved before you can post them up, or you have to wait 3 weeks after an advert's been taken down. Stuff. I mean, it's just a waste of time. The third one is reduce costs. Certainly, that's one of the things that you would be looking at. There's always a balance between these things, between procedures and costs. But yes, within a working way, and a way which improves the operations of the company, it can reduce costs. It can be spread across several departments. It certainly can. I mean, when you look at something, procurement is a good one that we saw. To cut the procurement procedures in many UN agencies has been a big task. And obviously you've got people who are out there in Kenya or Bolivia or Vietnam or wherever, and they want to buy computers. So we get this idea that they get used to faster procedures. It comes to head office, it gets approved immediately. We locally source the project, so we don't have to wait for Dell to deliver a computer to Myanmar from New York. And so all of the departments join in and they buy in with it. Again, it's usually, with all of these things, you get the early adopters who are really into the IT system, and then you get people who get the drivers to do it for them. But in principle, it spreads across several departments, and so you can get chain links as well. And number 5 is it encourages positive review and criticism, as long as it's well done. And to be honest, having set up a department that does this, there are what my boss used to love to call low-hanging fruit. There are certain areas of the business that were so heavily criticised all the time that just being seen to attack those areas and being seen to be doing something brought a very positive response from major areas of the business. So yes, it can be very, very positive. I emphasise the word can. Okay, so we gave 5 advantages. I mean, I think really you're just looking for 2 or 3 advantages and 2 or 3 disadvantages here. But again, this was such an easy question. Please do note though, you list the advantage and then you have to give a sentence to explain it. So we did the advantages on slide number 11. Slide number 12. The cost of making and identifying fruit is greater than the benefit. That can happen. I mean, this is like every process. The other thing that happens is you go through a great process, your justification, you have to get, because it's a bureaucracy like the UN, you have to get 10 different people to approve it, and then the auditors turn around and go no. You have to be careful of what the cost of the actual physical process itself are. It may be seen as a one-off process. It can be. We built a department, just a small department of a few people, who had the ability to work in different other departments. It may be seen as a one-off process. Even that isn't an enormous disadvantage. Some positive change is better than none. It may engender a culture of culture for culture's sake. That's true. It can certainly be seen as the more projects we undertake, the better we are, and people want to be associated with this. So yes, you have to be careful that you're not just changing things for change's sake. The department improves, but the overall performance falls. Yes, that can happen as well. You have to remember that a department is part of a greater chain of processes. So you make improvements in your department, but other departments fail. In terms of money, we certainly saw business process re-engineering at headquarters was allocated significant funds while simultaneously cutting costs in the field. And so people in the field were going to say, oh great, so we're spending all this money on people who are effectively overheads, whereas the people who actually do the work get nothing from this. So that was a bit of an issue. And you can link that to the last point. It may hit serious resistance in some staff. Certainly you get staff who are concerned of it, certainly staff who are, so if you have a team of people, I saw this in one organisation, a team of people who produce documents to cover transactions, and those documents go to the Russian tax police. And the Russian tax police didn't ever really want this stuff, or look at it, but trying to basically you just had to say we have to get rid of these people. And that's difficult, because if those people had approached it more, well, we'll work with you, but find something for us, it would have been much easier. So hit serious resistance stuff. Find too much process reduction may take place. Yes, I mean you can get to the point where people have an incredible amount of autonomy, whilst the Tom Peters of this world will say empower people, make them feel like part of a team. You can go too far with that, and then of course when you suddenly find that these people have been selling goods to their sister at massive over bloated prices, purchasing goods at massive over bloated prices, then of course the back swing kicks in on the pendulum. So you can go too far one way, which will then take you too far back the other way. Right, your disadvantage, you only really need 2 or 3. The cost of making improvements is greater than the improvements. That can happen. It can be seen as a one-off process. Well, it can, I guess. I'm not really sure what more you say about that, but hopefully the success of one will lead to more. Culture of change for change's sake. Yes, this is something in real life people want to be associated with because it's forward-looking, it's interesting, and resistance from stuff. Okay, that I thought for 25 marks was a godsend of a question. I think in ACCA Paper 5 you're going to get a lot more required of you than just those things for 25 marks. But it's a nice question that tackles your basic knowledge, if not so much of your application. The next question as well, which is a question called Briggs, which is an old, I've got a feeling this is a CIMA question as well, but possibly ACCA. This is a question as well, which is fairly limited application, a bit more application than business process re-engineering, but it does go with the standard structure of explain the thing to me and then let's apply it to a situation. So with Briggs, you're asked to describe what the 7 things are. So you've got your hard and soft skills, strategy, structure, and systems. You are at most looking at one line for each of these, really, with seven things and 5 marks. That's a bit strange to put it like that. So your hard one's the strategy. So what's the strategy of the organisation, and how is that communicated? Structure, what's the structure of the organisation? So is it hierarchy, is it flat? Do you have matrix structure where you've got different people making different decisions? And thirdly, what are the systems of the organisation? So what's the internal procedures of the organisation? So strategy, the name tells you what's the strategy. The structure, how is the business actually organised in terms of its management structure? And number three, the systems, what are the procedures of the organisation? That, if you have any problems with that, then wind the video back and go and look at the slides go and look at the section on McKinsey before. Then you've got the four softer ones, which are the staff. So who are your staff? What are they made up of? What's their take on life? The style. So what's the style of the organisation? How do we behave? You know, you get these new companies now where people are positively encouraged not to wear a suit and so on. Shared values. This is this idea we came back to before, which comes from McKinsey as well. Who are the heroes of the organisation? What are the things that are generally considered to be to be good, and so on? And forget, investment banks, when guys who can sell $50 million worth of bonds are considered to be heroes. In some organisations, almost people who stand up to the organisation seem to be heroes. And finally, skills. So what skills do the people have? So that's a nice easy. What skills do they have? Who are our heroes? What's the values? What is the style of the organisation? Is it relaxed? Is it bureaucracy? Is it rigid? And the staff. Who are the people and what do they actually do? Right, I think you should be able to know those 7 things. The one thing I would say about this question is that you weren't given the 7 things, so you have to actually remember them. That is not typical of the style of the new examiner at paper P5. The style of the new examiner is that he'll actually tell you what those 7 things are. So try to remember them, but if you can't remember, I don't think that's the end of the world. I think the interpretation and analysis of the things is more important. Because my suspicion is that he'll give you. In the last exam, which was June 2015, as I speak here, the guy gave you the Porter's value chain and so on. So you were actually given the picture, so you didn't need to remember what the things were. Right, part B is moving closer onto the skills that you as an individual need at paper P5 now. So when we look at this part of the question, this is now a good part of the question, because this is the kind of thing that you can expect in paper P5. So this is where you absolutely need to do a plan, and you absolutely need to do your structure. So before you even start thinking about the thing, it says, using the model, analyze the key performance management issues facing the firm. Right, you should be thinking structure. What's going to give me a structure? Well, you know what's going to give you a structure because you've got the 7 different things. So look at the slide there. What we're on now, slide number 14. So you've got your 7 headings. So your answer is going to be report format, therefore, which is going to be what are the key performance management issues facing the firm. And under each one of those 7 things, you're going to try to write a minimum of 1 thing. So there's 1 thing that you will write. 1 point for identification and 1 point for expansion. And hopefully the marker will give you 1 for presentation if you're lucky. So those are your 7 things, right? That's what you need to have clearly in your head. Remember the mentality. Everything I need for this answer is in the question. I need to pull it out the question, but it's all about structure, planning, and presentation, getting the whole thing down, right? So therefore, we have this thing here, which is strategy. So first of all, what does the question tell us about strategy? Right, at this point, you should probably turn me off and make sure you've read the question so you know what's in it. Otherwise, you're going to be clicking backwards and forwards, and that's not so easy on YouTube, these YouTube videos. So let's just have a little look, therefore, at strategy. It tells us, therefore, that the company, somewhere it tells us that the company has no formal strategy when we look at this. So therefore, in terms of point identification, under strategy, the business has no strategy. How are we going to address that? What's the man's name? It's Tom or something, yeah? Right, Tom therefore needs to get one of these things. So he needs to get a formal strategy. So he needs to sit down with his management team and they need to plan what it is that they're going, what it is that they're trying to achieve. Otherwise, he's just having a little bit of fun here. And teaching can be fun, actually. It's quite a good fun career to have for many people. So therefore, identification point, there is no strategy. Rectification or expansion, whatever you want to call it, we need to get some. So therefore, write that in a slightly formal way in 1 or 2 sentences. Therefore, what Tom needs to do is he needs to get a formal strategy and communicate that strategy to the organisation and ensure that this strategy is reflected in everything the organisation does. Right, structure. It tells us that the initial was to grow its share in the market, and given it had employees, the structure was very, very simple. Right, so therefore the structure is very simple. So what Tom needs to do is he needs to sit down and draw an org chart. I hope everyone knows what an org chart is, an organizational chart that says who is responsible for what. So therefore you'll start with a blank piece of paper, you'll draw up positions, and then for each position you'll say what the responsibilities are, what the objectives are, how that meets the strategy. And so we start with this idea of just putting in a structure to the organization. Once he's got a structure to the organization, he can then put names to it, and then once he's got names to it, he can add additional values such as salary and so on and so forth. So that's how we identify the point in our structure. We get a structure, and then we expand out of it further. Right, systems. There are no formal systems. So he needs to bring in a consultant, somebody like me, or he needs to get someone internally as a project and a team, and he needs to do this fast and make sure it's reflected that it's important. But those guys need to work out what the processes are. So what happens in selling? What do we do? How do we contact people? How do we follow up? What do we do with our advertising? What do we do with our HR? What do we do with our hiring? What do we do with our holidays? And the whole thing. And core to all of this, I imagine, therefore, will be usually some form of IT system. So the IT system needs to reflect all of this. And you'll forgive me, I'm a little bit IT obsessed, but when I go to organizations and we look even at changing cultures of organizations, the first thing that happens is what is their use of IT? Because everybody needs IT to do their job now. Unless you're a shepherd or something, you can't get by without IT. IT has limitations, so let's build around the systems and the structure of the IT system. Right, those are your 3 hard facts. For each one of those facts, you now have a plan. Now you can begin to write. In a minute, actually I don't mean now, I mean finish the plan. Right, number 4 is this idea of the staff. So who are the staff? Where do they come from? Now it tells you in the question. The question is very kind of blunt with you. It's not a difficult question. It tells us that initial joiners were offered shares, chaotic management style, and attracted experienced staff who were adventurous and valued teamwork. So therefore that's what your staff is. Adventurous and valued teamwork is great for certain positions. I imagine that for tutors, for example, it's important. He needs to hire some people he doesn't really like that much. That's a very strange comment, but I have deliberately hired people I don't like that much in the past, and I deliberately looked after them and made sure that they feel welcome when I owned my own organisation. I did it because you're hiring people that don't have skills that you want, don't have skills that you have, but they need those skills for their jobs. Presumably, for example, he has a database where he keeps all of his database of his clients, of his students, and also the database of all of his material. You don't want adventurous people being in charge of the databases. You want, I don't want to use the word boring people, but people who have a slightly different skill set, who are more accurate and so on and so forth. So therefore, with the staff, he needs to ensure that the people that he has. And you can tie that into style as well. Remember this idea that try to get one thing under each. The style, what does it tell us about the style? Chaotic management style. He needs to bring a little bit of order to that. Can I just say as well that you often get this, that people who work in training companies often are a little bit chaotic. And the bizarre thing is that these people are normally delivering courses and selling courses on meetings, for example, or organisation within your organisation. I have to say that one of the big things in training is that you're always trying to persuade other people to give people time off work to go on training courses. And yet so many training companies will not give their own staff time for training. Right, back on track. That's me disappearing off there. Give an example of what not to do. Style. Chaotic management style. Tom needs to get himself more organised and needs to sell the idea to everyone else that he's organised, because that chaos will be treated as a value, which is a good value to have in the organisation. And it's not. You need to be organised. Right, shared values. So therefore then with the shared values, this idea again, we can bring in this idea of chaos, and we can tie it into the sense before. So therefore with your shared values, we need to do that. Quality, for example, is a shared value. Now it doesn't actually say anywhere that they don't have any quality, but here we go. Trust and teamwork have disappeared due to so many new employees. So with shared values, therefore, we want a shared value to be loyalty. So we want a shared value to be loyalty. And we engender that by, and there's some good stuff in there, we're giving them shares and so on. So your identification point is that shared values, the shared values need to be quality, everyone needs that one, in paper P5, or it needs to be teamwork and so on. And then how do we engender that? Well, we engender that by having some training, having some teamwork exercises, by trying to encourage and motivate the staff who have joined in to become part of the team, and getting people to work together. And for a company which sells lifestyle and counselling services online, it shouldn't be too difficult to organise one of those things. But that program needs to be run to bring people together. Finally, skills. It says here in terms of skills, and this is a good thing. Remember with P5 as well, there'll be good things inside. So it says Tom has introduced new motivation, reward and control systems based on bonuses, individual targets, recruited experts in different fields, and encourage a culture of enthusiasm and excellence. But you can include that into share values. You can also put that in the skills. So therefore, we have some ongoing, skills, therefore we've got new people in, so let's engender and spread those skills, let's get some excellence into the program, and let's ensure that people are being trained properly, presentation skills, technical skills, and so on. So everything is not bad news here, and once again, you're being specifically told to do Mackenzie's, but don't forget with SWOT that some of the stuff is positive as well. Okay, that is part B. I want you now to look at what you've done. If you've written anything, you should have 7 headings. Under each heading, you should have 1 identification point and 1 expansion point. So part C of the question, assuming a divisional structure is set up for each country, I couldn't really see what the point of that was. So it says, suggest with reasons 2 critical success factors and 1 key performance indicator. So once again, the guy has given you the structure here now. So you should be, let's just start with the success factors, even though they're upside down on my slide. So with your success factors, you need 2. Right, you're opening up a new foreign organisation. So therefore, what would be our success factors? Well, the first thing would be attracting qualified local staff. One of the huge costs of running international businesses, even geographically spread businesses, is this idea that you have to fly people in, so there's a cost of putting them on aeroplanes, then you have to put them in hotels and so on. So attracting qualified local staff who can do this job for you will cut, $100 a day off of your cost for a tutor, which is a big sum of money when you've got half a dozen tutors doing 125 days a year. So your success factor is attracting qualified local staff. Why is it important? Because it reduces your costs. Also, my experience is that over time, people like the tutor to come from the same background as them, so the examples that they use, the cultural references that they make are better as well. So I would say attracting qualified local staff is 1. Right, the second one is obtaining all of the local licenses. You're going to need someone on the ground, because in most countries, to be an educational provider, you actually have to have a license. So therefore, there is some document which is required. If you don't get that document, then it's illegal. Now, you can try to set up by doing rep offices and so on, but usually you need these things. So success factors to making the thing go, in fact, if this was a well-structured argument, would say local licenses first, because that would be the first step. Then when you're open, then you put your ads up, and then you start hiring your local tutors. So that would be 2 success factors. I've got another one on there, setting up a performance review system. Now, that would be true as well. Right, then your performance indicator would be something like, number of students, average number of students on the course. Presumably for most courses you have your perfect number. So for ACCA teaching, for me personally, my perfect number is something like 20. At 20 on the course, I have enough people that if a couple of people are late or they pop out, it doesn't make any difference. It's a good number to get a good discussion going, and it's not so many people that you have to start using microphones and videos and things for people at the back. So how close are you to your perfect number? Financially, your perfect number is your maximum number, and your limiting factor will be your room size. So number of students, if you're going to keep the thing sustainable, customer satisfaction as well. So what scores are you getting on your assessment forms, and what are people responding to in terms of their registration, their payments, and all that admin stuff that goes with it. Okay, right, that was Briggs. I don't think that there was very much there. What's most important for you is to remember this idea, therefore, you've got 14 marks for part B, and the 7 things in the model. So it's very, very clear for you, big message. 1 for identification, 1 for expansion. Part C as well, and that's why I really like this question, there's 6 marks. So the guy's asked for 3 things, 2 success, and give him 2 success factors and 1 performance indicator. Identification mark. Okay, that's great. Best of luck studying.